What's good, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Guess what? Another SWI. And last night I was laying in bed and I thought of something really funny about before I said SWI, but I totally forgot. Oh, surprise, surprise, another SWI. That's what it was. And you guys probably thought I wrote that down, but I swear to God I didn't. And the phone we're looking at today is none other than the iPhone 4. Now, there's really no point into still looking at this phone and being like, is it still worth it? Because ultimately, it's really not. Nobody should, really be using this phone still if they have any other choices. I'll give you an example. I mean, I've been looking at used iPhone 4 prices recently because I wanted to buy one to make some artifact out of it. And you can probably pick up a broken one for like $10. You can pick up a working one for like $25. But for $50 to $60, you can pick up like an iPhone 6, which is way better of a value than an iPhone 4. But from like $80 to $90, you can pick up an iPhone 6s. And that's the phone I would recommend most people, going far back as. That's the oldest iPhone I would recommend people using, the iPhone 6s or the iPhone SE. Anything below that, I would really not recommend people using. Even the 6s and SE, I would recommend people buying, even if it doesn't get iOS 14. It's still going to get app updates to the App Store and everything. But for the iPhone 4, this is a phone that came out in 2010, and honestly, it brought so much to the table. It was probably one of the biggest changes from one generation to the other. And to give you an example, I mean, the phone before the iPhone 4 was the iPhone 3GS, and that was the phone that, pretty much a lot of people knew about. That's what, when people envision an old iPhone, that's kind of the first thing they think about. It had that older design, had that curved back, which I found really weird. And honestly, it just didn't feel like the most premium thing. It felt very cheap. Compared to the competition, it felt a little bit better, but looking back at it now, it really wasn't like the most premium thing ever. However, when Apple made the iPhone 4 in 2010, a whole over 9 years ago, this phone was literally one of the most insane phones at that time. And funny thing though is that I did hear that apparently some concept, or like Apple made the iPhone 4 concept or whatever, and that actually ended up getting leaked, or like somebody left it at a bar or something like that, and then somebody else got it, and then like apparently that like will it blend guy got it. Like, I don't even understand how that happened. But that's a humongous part of history for Apple, and that's like one thing they learned from there. But the iPhone 4 was involved with that. Now, looking at the front, this thing had a 3.5-inch display, which was the same as previous generations, but this was the first time we saw a Retina display. They went from that standard, really pixelated screen, in my opinion, to the newer IPS panel. The resolution was 640 by 960, and what I can tell you is this panel was probably one of the better things that this iPhone was brought with. I mean, they didn't expand the panel, they didn't make it bigger until like the iPhone 5. But the fact of the matter is that the front, it might have looked the same to a lot of people, whatever, but it was pretty much everything else that this phone brought. The screen was better. This thing brought a front camera, which was amazing. This was the first iPhone to bring that. It might have not been the best one, it might have been a weirder one, it might have been whatever, but it still brought it, and that's all that matters. FaceTime was on this phone. The rest of this phone felt like one of the most premium phones ever, and even holding it now, there's not a lot of phones that came out in 2010 that you can still hold and be like, oh my god, this thing is still completely usable. This thing feels like something that would come out this day and age. Like, if you took away all the bezel on this phone, you would have a phone that just feels like a OnePlus 7 Pro, or like even like an iPhone 10. And in a lot of ways, I'll be honest, the iPhone 4 kind of feels more premium than like an iPhone 11 Pro, for example. That glass back I really like on the iPhone 4. The chassis of the phone, the whole heft to the phone has so much weight to it. It feels so nice. And that's definitely one of the most premium things about this phone, is just the way it feels, the way it looks. It just looks like some executive phone. And it's funny, back in the day, I think like back in like 2011, I bought a fake iPhone 4. And for fake phones, even back in 2011, I mean, those things weren't that good at all. But even the fake iPhone 4s felt very premium, which was so funny. You had the 30-pin connector on the bottom, as well as the headphone jack. And even though that's pretty much it on the outside, it's still pretty impressive at how Apple went from the 3GS to the iPhone 4 and really shook up the competitors. I mean, back in 2010, I think we might have had like the Galaxy S1 or something like that. Maybe the Galaxy S2, probably. I don't even remember. I think the S3 came out in 2012, so we might have had the S2, I believe. I could be totally wrong, but there wasn't a lot of like super premium phones at the time of this release, and that's one thing that this phone had going for it, in my opinion. Now, in terms of software, this thing started off with iOS 4. You were able to upgrade it to iOS 7.1.2, which is awesome, and honestly, it's not really that great. iOS 7, even though it brought a pretty big UI change, it kind of, I think, bogged down the system memory of this phone, and it wasn't even a fast phone to begin with, but even after the update, it made it even slower. slower. So I'm glad this thing got such a huge UI refresh, for a phone that could barely even handle it. But now I don't think really many people even care about it anymore because not many people are using it. So that kind of covers it up in terms of software. It's not getting any more software updates. Now, in terms of the performance, okay, this thing has the Apple A4 chip, 1 GHz CPU, a single core CPU, and half a gigabyte of RAM, so 512 megabytes on each model. There's actually 3 different models of it, an 8 gigabyte model, 16 gigabyte model, and 32 gigabyte model. And without a doubt, I'll definitely tell you, back on iOS 4 days, I remember hearing people talking about, the performance was great, everything was good. I would say up until iOS 6, and then eventually iOS 7 came out, and that's what really took a toll on the whole entire performance of each phone actually that was running iOS 7. When I was looking back on the forums on Reddit and all those things and seeing people talk about their past performance, I don't know if those subreddits were around when the iPhone 4 was out, but I do know that a lot of people go back and talk about, the iPhone 4 when I owned it, this and that. And as a consensus, not a lot of people really hated on the performance of it. They didn't really notice it being too slow, in my opinion. But looking at it now on iOS 7, it's extremely slow. I'm not even trying to say that to be a jerk or anything like that. It's it's pretty bad, I'm not gonna lie. But even back in 2010, when I'm playing with my Galaxy S2 that came out around that time, that phone is still pretty usable. It's still pretty slow, but you can still get a lot of things done with it if you need to. The iPhone 4 though, I don't know what was going on with their heads when they released iOS 7. That really bogged down. And on top of that, the performance, the specs of this phone, it didn't really have that many things going for it. Half a gigabyte of RAM, the Apple A4 chip, and a single core CPU. It didn't have a lot to kind of mess with in the first place, but because the performance wasn't that great, it doesn't make this phone a horrible phone or it was a flop or whatever. It sold a ton of units. It brought a lot to the table, and even though the performance wasn't great, even looking at it now, it's still an important piece of Apple's history. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of apps you cannot get on this thing. I don't even think Temple Run will download on this thing anymore. There are ways to kind of go around that, but for some reason, I had some activation issues as well. I was not able to sign into my iCloud account sometimes, which I found super weird. But regardless, in terms of performance, that's pretty much it. I think you guys know how I stand. In terms of the cameras, you have a single 5 megapixel camera on the back and a single VGA camera on the front. Now, the front camera is pretty much only for FaceTiming and everything like that. But the quality isn't horrible either, which is surprising. It's bad, but for a 2010 phone, it's not really that bad. The back-facing camera with that 5 megapixels, actually, it's not bad either. The UI is a little bit laggy, when you turn the camera around and stuff, it gets a little bit weird. But for the most part, for everything else, it's actually not that bad of a camera, to be honest. Factoring in the age, if you release this camera now, obviously people would hate it and they wouldn't like it. But I think for the time being, when it was released and looking at it almost a decade later, dude, I think it's not that bad of a camera, and people actually might be surprised by how well this camera still performs. It wouldn't be my first choice, it wouldn't be my second choice, it probably wouldn't even be my 100th choice, but looking back at it now and looking at it, how it's kind of performing at this moment, it's pretty impressive in my opinion. So the camera, it kind of gives a thumbs up for me just for even having a camera and for the camera to still be working almost 10 years later. So to end it off, this thing had a 1420 mAh battery, and I will definitely tell you this battery is not at that 1400 anymore. I think my battery is at 500 mAh. My iPhone 4 does not last that long in terms of just using it and everything. I have experienced random shutdowns with it, but what's funny though is that the standby time is still pretty decent. I can get multiple days, sometimes even a week, just by standby time. So if I leave it in my drawer and I pick it back up a week later, that's perfectly fine. Now, I haven't messed with my iPhone 4 in a very long time, probably since my early 2019 review. But what I will say is that the battery life, I think previously to iOS 7 was pretty decent, but then iOS 7 came out and that kind of bogged things down even more. So what I can kind of sum up this whole entire phone is that obviously nobody should be using the iPhone 4 anymore. That's why I didn't call this video still worth it. I kind of did, but I didn't put in the title, but it kind of is, it's just a throwback in my opinion. I'm curious to see though, does anybody use the iPhone 4 still? Is anybody watching this video still using this phone? Because this phone, in my opinion, is pretty unusable, at least in 2019, maybe even 2-3 years ago, maybe some people were still using it. I knew a person who owned an iPhone 4S and was still using it, but the iPhone 4, that's kind of, pretty out there in my opinion. But with all that said, I don't want to take away what this phone brought. This phone brought the way higher build quality, which is 20 points in and of itself, in my opinion. It brought that front camera. That new design is amazing. And even though, probably wasn't that big of a performance increase from the 3GS, just everything else that this phone brought was insane, and it brought so much to the table that it really affected almost all iPhones after. And on top of that, this design with the the flat edges and everything is probably going to be making a comeback very soon, hopefully, with the next year's iPhone. iPhones. So there's like a little bit of iPhone 4 in every single phone, which is pretty insane. This iPhone is probably one of the most influential iPhones. It wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the best, it wasn't whatever, but it brought so much to the table that it really defined what Apple did in the future. Not even in terms of the phone themselves, but also, how they keep their phones so private and how they keep their supply chain so private and how they keep all their phone parts so private. They're still, a little rocky here and there. They still get some leaks out here and there, but ultimately, dude, the iPhone 4, I love this phone so much. And if you still own it in 2019 or if you're still using it for that matter, dude, let me know in the comment section below. I want to know how your experience is so far. But that's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section as well. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it would mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. All those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.